John Quinn was born in Detroit, Michigan in April 1962 with cerebral palsy. One of 8 children, John also had a strong desire to serve his country. So in spite of his partial paralysis, 2 different sized feet, and the inability to walk prior to the age of 4, John joined the United States Navy in January 1982, specializing in administration. He did it while keeping his condition a complete secret out of a deep desire to wear the uniform of his nation. Throughout his distinguished 20-year career, he has sailed around the world on aircraft carriers, battleships, destroyers, and is a plank owner, founding member specifically, of SEAL Team 3. His military decorations include the Navy Condemnation Medal, 4 awards, the Joint Service Achievement Medal, and the Navy Achievement Medal. He is authorized to wear the enlisted surface warfare insignia. Senior Chief Quinn is the author of Someone Like Me, an unlikely story of challenge and triumph over cerebral palsy. Since the publication of his memoir, John has addressed numerous organizations and Fortune 500 companies around the world. He makes his home in Tucson, Arizona. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. It's really nice to meet you, and thank you for the opportunity for me to come in and share my story with your followers. This is fantastic.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah, I'm a Senior Chief Petty Officer retired now. Now, what is that? Senior Chief, that's the second highest enlisted rank that you can hold. Most people know that you start out in the Navy as a seaman recruit, and you can go all the way up to Master Chief, which is an E9. So I retired as a Senior Chief, and I served in the Navy for over 20 years, sailing around the world on 2 aircraft carriers, the Dwight D. Eisenhower and the John C. Stennis. I served on board a battleship, the USS Iowa. I served on a destroyer. I worked with the Admiral of the Pacific Fleet in San Diego. And yeah, I'm a founding member of SEAL Team 3 in Coronado, California. No, I'm not a Navy SEAL. My job in the Navy was administration. So I went to SEAL Team 3 and I did their paperwork. And I was really excited to work with those guys. It was a lot of fun. I was there for about 3 years. But during my career, I sailed all around the world, made 6 deployments, spent about 10 years out to sea and training, leading a generation of sailors, some that are still serving today. So it was an honor and a privilege to serve my country. What makes my story unique is the fact that I was born with cerebral palsy. I couldn't walk on my own until I was about 4.5 years old, partially paralyzed on my left side. If you were to measure my left foot, it's about 2.5 sizes smaller than my right. And I kept everything a secret, not only to get in the Navy, but I maintained that secret during my entire 20-year career. Nobody, absolutely nobody knew that I had cerebral palsy. That is until I wrote a book about it, and then the fun began. But so let's talk a little bit about what cerebral palsy is. You know, cerebral palsy, there's so many misconceptions out there about what CP is. A lot of people think that it's a disease, that you can catch it by coming up and shaking my hand. Nothing can be further from the truth. What cerebral palsy is, it's really a brain injury. So think about cerebral, meaning your brain, and palsy, talking to the movement of your muscles. So it's, I think of it as like having a stroke as a young baby, as a baby, and then dealing with the after effect of that stroke for the rest of your life. Every case of cerebral palsy is unique to that individual. Some have a relatively mild case, like myself. Some have a more challenging case. Now remember, cerebral palsy, it affects every muscle in your body. So some people have a harder time walking, breathing, swallowing, speaking, even hearing. So, I'm very fortunate to be able to do most everything that I want to do. There's 17 million people in the world with cerebral palsy. Almost a million of them here in the United States. And again, cerebral palsy, it's not progressive. It doesn't get worse as you get older. What you have is what you've got. But it's one of the most common forms of childhood disabilities in this country. 1 in every 325 children is born with cerebral palsy. So it's really pretty common. It's more common than I think people realize. I was born in Detroit, one of 8 kids. 8 kids in the house, 1 bathroom. I tell everybody the real reason that I wanted to join the Navy was to get some privacy. But my childhood was fairly typical of kids growing up in the 1970s. I rode my Quinn Stingray bike out, throughout the neighborhood. We played with the Nerf football out in the street. We played home run derby in the corner lot. And, I really had a really good childhood. But the fact that I had cerebral palsy, my childhood was different. I had to go through grueling physical therapy with somebody that I refer to as the administrator of pain. And I had to go to downtown Detroit, Children's Hospital a couple of times a week. And I, my physical therapy in the early 70s was a lot different than it might be today. There were no gyms and health clubs and weights and aquatherapy and hippotherapy. No, I had surgical rubber tubing. So my therapist would take this rubber tubing and she would cut off about an 18-inch section of it, tie it in a loop, and she tossed it over to me. I think she had a Pall Mall cigarette dangling from her lips as she did this. And I had to stretch this rubber tubing out and walk across the room, and I also had to take it and then put it across my forearms and stretch out and stretch back and stretch out and stretch back. And it was hard. It was pretty tough. I remember also doing an exercise called a time sit exercise, where I had to sit with my back up against the wall, and the therapist would click a stopwatch, and I had to try and stay seated up, in the seated position for as long as I could. It was tough. In my childhood, I was picked on, laughed at, teased, bullied. I wore eye patches because, I had issues with my eyes. I wore long pants all summer long to hide my pipe cleaner legs. It was tough. Kids can be tough, and I dealt with quite a bit. All I really wanted to do was play with my brothers and sisters, and that was what my physical therapy. When I look back on it, that's really what my physical therapy was being outside playing. My parents were great. They let me do anything I wanted to do. And they told me, I remember it very clearly. They said, don't ever allow the fact that you have cerebral palsy stop you from achieving great things. They expected me to do well, and whatever I wanted to do, they just let me try. And I think, they could see that life was going to be a little bit more challenging for me. And when I fell down, which was a lot, they didn't come rushing over to pick me up. My folks were like, my dad especially was like, are you going to lay there and cry? Are you going to get up? Choice is yours. Dinner's at 5 o'clock. You better hurry up. So I could see that they could see that life was going to be challenging for me, and they knew that I needed to develop some mental toughness in my life. Their thing to me was, you can do whatever you want, just don't quit and finish what you start. I remember in the 7th grade, I wanted to join the wrestling team. My brothers were on the team, and we were always wrestling in the house. And my dad at the dinner table, he said, all right, good luck. You know, remember, don't come home crying and don't quit. So I joined the wrestling team, and I didn't tell anybody on the team that I had cerebral palsy. And to be a wrestler, you have to be quick on your feet. You got to be strong. You have to anticipate moves and all that. Well, I was none of that. I was 78 pounds in the 7th grade, you know. But after about 2 weeks, you know, I was struggling a little bit. The coach calls me into his office and he says, "Yeah, you're cut. Clean out your locker," you know. And I was crushed. And I come out of the coach's office, I had tears in my eyes. The team's best wrestler, who was an 8th grader, his name is Phil. He asked me what's wrong, and I told him. And Phil went in and talked to the coach. And for many years, until I started writing my book, I didn't know what they talked about. But Phil said to the coach, he goes, this kid's got more heart, more determination, and more character than anybody I've ever met. If you cut him from the team, I'm leaving too. Now, again, Phil was the team's best wrestler. He was in the 8th grade. It's pretty incredible. And I got to wrestle all the way through junior high, and I wrestled all the way through high school. Now, this is the part of the story where I turned into an all-state grappler with countless victories under my belt. Yeah, that didn't happen. That didn't happen. In fact, I never won a match. You know, I think my career record was 0-79. But 2 things. I didn't quit, so I kept my word to my father. And that 8th grader, that kid who stuck up for me when I really needed somebody to do that, he's my best friend even today. We talk on the phone just about every day. And I think about that. If I had quit, you know, how different my life would be, because my buddy Phil wouldn't be in my life today. He's the school superintendent. And again, I was the best man in his wedding, and he's one of the greatest guys I've ever met. And I think about that when I talk about inclusion and opportunity and the things that I've gained in my life just by being part of things, being allowed to be part of things in society. So I graduated high school, and you know, when I was in high school, computers were just coming on the scene. Now, I'm a little older than most, so I remember taking computer programming classes. COBOL and Fortran and RPG and Assembler and BASIC. Now, you probably don't know what those languages are. Now, yeah. I used to carry around key punch cards under my arm. Used to have to, each key punch card was a line of code, and I was writing programming that was hundreds of lines of code. And again, computers were just coming on the scene. But it wasn't really what I wanted to do. I remember my oldest brother coming home from Navy boot camp in 1972 with short hair and dog tags, and how different he was. It was just so cool, you know, to see him and yes sir and no ma'am. I was about 11 years old, and made a big impression on me. I remember talking to him up we shared a bedroom, and he had this chain around his neck, and I was like, "Hey, Mike, what's that chain? What are those things around your neck?" He goes, "Oh, these are my dog tags." He goes, I said, "Man, that's cool, you know." I was pretty impressed. He goes, "I'll tell you what, Jenny," he says, you turn 18, you join the Navy, they'll make a set just for you. And I was like, this is fantastic. So I'm going to college, and you know, I just didn't really like doing the computer programming thing. It just wasn't my thing. So one day I'm sitting there, and I don't recommend this, but I had my key punch cards and my flow charts and my pencils and all sorts of stuff on the table. I picked it all up and walked over to the fireplace. And I threw it in the fire. Now my dad was sitting there. Now my dad was a tough Detroit Irish policeman, right? And I'll never forget, he was sitting in his lazy boy. He looked up to me. He says, "Are you having a bad day?" I said, "No, I'm having a good day." My daddy, no nonsense. He says, "I'll give you 2 weeks. You better figure something out." So the next day, I literally walked across the street, and I joined the Navy. And I didn't tell anybody in the Navy about my cerebral palsy. A couple of reasons about that. I didn't think they'd let me in if they knew that I had cerebral palsy. But more importantly to me, I didn't want to be known as a sailor with cerebral palsy. I just wanted to be a sailor. Now, when you join the Navy, you got to go take a physical. So we go down to downtown Detroit. There's about 50 guys taking this physical. We've been there all day. And, you're going from room to room to room. You're getting poked and prodded. And by this time, it's about 4:30. We're all tired. And but we're close to being done. And I'm thinking to myself, man, I got this. We're almost done. Let's go. Now, these three doctors come in. They said, one last exercise before you become property of Uncle Sam. Get down in a catcher squat and put your arms out straight. And we're going to have you waddle around the room while you're in this catcher squat. It's this exercise. It's called the duck walk. We want you to do it. So I tried it. Well, right away, my mind flashed back to my childhood. I was like, oh my gosh, right? Because it reminded me of the time sit exercise as a kid. So by this time, I'm about 6'1". I'm a strapping 128 pounds. And I get down in this duck walk, and my body shakes, and I fall over. And everybody starts laughing, except those doctors. They said, what's wrong with you? I said, nothing. And try it again. Tried it again, fell over again. They pulled me out of line and said, son, we don't know what's wrong with you, but we don't want somebody like you in the Navy. Go home. So I did. Now, I came through the front door of my house. Again, my dad is sitting there. How'd it go, son? I said, Dad, it was hard. Even for somebody with healthy legs, it was hard. I'll never forget it. My dad looked at me and said, Johnny, life is hard. Question is, what are you going to do about it? So the next day, down in my basement, I started doing that duck walk exercise. I did it every day for a year. And then I went back, again, keeping my condition a secret. I was the best duck walker in that entire building, I'll tell you. I passed that physical with flying colors. But really, that was just the first step in the journey for me. I had to go to boot camp. In boot camp, for me, it was very difficult. I'm going to give you a bit of advice. If you join Navy boot camp, don't go in January because they're going to send you to Chicago, Illinois, and it's cold in Chicago. In January 1982, when I went to boot camp, it was one of the coldest winters in Chicago history. And I had a problem with my feet. Remember, I got those two different size feet. And they issue you, your entire uniform. You don't wear civilian clothes or anything like that. So they give you these boots called boondockers, and they're a stiff leather shoe, and they had a metal strip in the back. And it just tore my feet off, and I got blisters really bad, and I got infected. I got cellulitis, and I wound up in the hospital for a couple of weeks. And I remember being in the hospital. They literally put my ankles in harnesses. They cut my ankles open and draining out the poison, and they're going to send me home. Literally, a yeoman came by with my discharge papers, put a pen in my hand and said, sign this. Is all he said, just sign this. And I looked at it, I said, what is this? He goes, it's your discharge certificate. We're sending you home. You've taken quite a pounding. I don't want to go home. So I got to stay in the Navy. And I finished boot camp in the back, on crutches. I'd broken my ankle, didn't even realize it. But I finished boot camp, and I got to serve for the next 20 years. And, when I look back on it, my story is really one of inclusion. It's one of opportunity. And I think, inclusion, which is a pretty big word in our society today. People often talk about inclusive. Companies talk about how inclusive they are. Well, I think that inclusion often is looked at as a lowering of a standard to make it easier for me. I have a disability, so therefore there's no way that I can hit that standard. I've got to have help, right? No, that's not true, right? Inclusion is simply the opportunity for me to hit the same standard as everybody else. That's it. That's it. But we live in a society today that just dismisses people so quickly, right? We see somebody standing different, running different, somebody in a power chair or has to use a breathing device or a parapro. We often think, well, that person can't do that job. You know, myself with cerebral palsy, there's no way that I can serve in the Navy with cerebral palsy. That's not possible. Well, it is possible. I did it. I stood every watch. On 9/11, I was out to sea for 9 months. You know, I made 6 deployments and rose to the rank of senior chief petty officer. So when I speak of inclusion, it's often to break through and show what's possible. Like, for example, when I failed my physical, right? When I couldn't do that dog walk exercise, it wasn't because I had cerebral palsy. It simply was the fact that my body wasn't strong enough to hit their standard, okay? So I had to go, what did I have to do? I had to go home, get stronger, come back and try again. And I was able to hit that standard. And that's the thing that I talk about is we don't want to dismiss people because everybody's got ability. Everybody's got something to offer this world. I don't care who you are and I don't care what anybody has to say. Everybody has value. You just have to find a way to achieve what you want. And the best way for us to do that as a society is to include everybody. You know, not everybody's going to be able to serve in the military with cerebral palsy. I understand that, but some can. I get emails just about every week from people all over the world. People who've read my book or watched my YouTube videos, and they'll say, Mr. Quinn, I want to serve in the Navy too. Give me some advice. And I tell them, well, you got to go talk to the recruiter and this and that. The problem is these kids aren't even being allowed to take the physical to see if they're eligible for enlistment. And that's where I have my problem, you know. So, you know, it's so frustrating sometimes. I tell the story of a baseball player. I'm a big sports guy. I love sports, right? There's a pitcher that I love. I remember growing up, he pitched for the University of Michigan. He pitched for Team USA. He got drafted by the California Angels. He pitched a no-hitter for the Yankees. And his name's Jim Abbott. Now, if you know Jim Abbott was born without a right hand. And I love that story, simply for a couple of reasons. Not only was Jim Abbott a great pitcher, right? But what I love is what you didn't hear society say about Mr. Abbott. You didn't hear Major League Baseball say, hey, look at you. You don't have a right hand. Don't even try. You know, come on, just go home. We can't use somebody like you. And Mr. Abbott, you didn't hear Jim say, you know, hey, I don't have a right hand. So here's what I need. I need the pitcher's mound moved in 5 feet every time I pitch. Okay? No. Here's the ball. Here's the plate. There's the catcher. Go throw strikes. That's the standard. You know, I'm not saying that people don't need help in their job. If you need assistance, you can get assistance. That's great. You should ask for it, whatever you need. But my issue is when society says, no, you can't, you know, without even thinking about it. You know, I remember serving on an aircraft carrier in 1996. I served on board the Dwight D. Eisenhower. It was the first carrier to have women on board, right? Wow. Up until 1996, women were not allowed to serve on ships that went into combat. Right? And it was a big deal because it was more getting through the mindset of the people that had gone before me, who had a preconceived idea of no, women can't do this work, you know, or they don't belong here, whatever it was. But I remember standing up in a meeting and we had these 100 women on board and some of my coworkers were saying, well, this will never work. Of course it's going to work. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to set the standard just like we do any other sailor. We're going to keep the standard high. And we're going to allow these people to these sailors to hit the standard. And if they can't hit the standard, we're going to train them and show them how to become better sailors, because that's what we do. And now you think about it, here it's 2020. Women now are in charge of ships that go into combat. Women are the commanding officers of squadrons and destroyers and aircraft carriers and those kind of things. So, that's really what my story is. It's just one of inclusion and opportunity. It was an honor and a privilege to serve my country. I would have loved to have told the truth. And to be honest with you, now that one of the last lines in my book, it feels good to tell the truth, because nobody should ever have to keep a secret in order to live the life that they want for themselves. So, yeah, so that's it. And, we could take some questions from that, but that's really what my story is all about.
Wonderful. Your story is really powerful.
Thank you.
Really, really powerful. All right. So you spoke about this a little bit, but when you were in the U.S. Navy, you mentioned how you kept your disability a secret. Can you elaborate more as to why you kept it a secret? Like, was there shame also involved about, I think you'd mentioned, getting kicked out of the Navy? What was the disability culture back then in terms of inclusion?
The disability culture, it was a lot more strict, I believe, in the early 80s when I was in. But even now, if somebody had cerebral palsy, a mild case of cerebral palsy, and they wanted to join the Navy, they wouldn't be able to do it. Wouldn't be able to do it. And they would just say, no, you have cerebral palsy, you can't join. But to answer your question, the reason I kept it a secret is, I loved being in the military. And, I wanted to make it a career. I could tell right away that, I wanted to serve my country for longer than 4 years. But even during my first initial 4-year enlistment, I was always concerned about the idea of keeping my cerebral palsy a secret, the fact that I kept it a secret from the Navy. In fact, that thought carried through during my entire career. I always had a nightmare that somebody was going to knock on the door, come in and say, hey, we know all about you, we're kicking you out, you're going home. Even after all I've accomplished, that thought was always in the back of my mind. I tell a story in the book of at the end of my first enlistment, every time you want to stay in for another 4 years, you have to take another physical. So I go to take this physical, and I'm at SEAL Team 3, right? Working with the Navy SEALs, exercising with those guys every day. So I go in to take this physical, and the Navy SEAL doctor, he had me up on the table, and he was measuring my legs and my hips, and he's looking at me, and he's like, get off the table and walk across the floor. He's looking, and he walks over to this big medical journal. He opens it up, and he's looking at me, he's looking, and I'm sweating bullets, because if he says anything to me negatively, like, yeah, I know, I wouldn't have been able to re-enlist and stay in the Navy. So after a couple of minutes of silence, he kind of looked at me and said, are you keeping something from me? I said, no, sir. So he slams the book. He goes, I'll tell you what. He goes, I'm going to let you re-enlist, but you better make something of yourself. Mm. And that's a true story. And so, I always had, it would have been great to tell the truth. It would have been great, because the emotional toll that keeping that secret put on me was very difficult. I had nobody to turn to, nobody to say, hey, I'm having a bad day because of this, or my muscles are hurting. And, life on board ship is very physically demanding. You literally have to stand watches. And when you stand a watch, you're literally standing watches, 4 hours at a time, sometimes back-to-back watches. And I couldn't, tell anybody, hey, I can't do that, or, can you help me out? I'm struggling a little bit. No, and that's the decision that I made. And once that decision was made, I had to carry it through. And even when I was writing my book, I was really concerned about what the Navy Department was going to say once my book was published. And so what I did with that was, once I had the manuscript done, I sent it off to some friends of mine in Washington, D.C. And I told them what my concerns were. And again, nobody knew about my cerebral palsy. So I told this Navy commander that I'd served with on a couple of ships, I told him what the book was about. He couldn't believe it. He read the book, and I said, hey, I think, I'm worried that the Navy Department is going to come after me for false enlistment. Real or imagined, I don't know. So this commander said, give me a couple of weeks and I'll see what I can do. So a couple of weeks later, the phone rings, and it's literally the Navy JAG, the admiral, the top lawyer in the entire Navy Department. He said, hey, Senior Chief, I've got your book here. Oh, hello, Admiral, how are you today? He goes, yeah, I read your book. He goes, that's quite an amazing story. He goes, I just wanted to call and congratulate you on a great career. You passed every physical and you stood every watch. Congratulations. I was like, thank you. I was so relieved because, again, you don't know how people are gonna take things. And when people often ask me about keeping my cerebral palsy a secret, and I come right back to them. I said, what does it say about a society that I have to keep it a secret? I should never have to do that. They should literally say, hey, here's the standard. If you can hit the standard, you should be allowed in, but they don't do that. Even today, they don't do that. And that's where I have a problem. So it was tough. It was tough physically, it was tough emotionally. And I talk about in the book where I turned to alcohol to help me with that. Yeah, it's been quite a journey.
You got through it though, so it's a big pat on the back for you.
Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. So being in the Navy and winning all your medals obviously is a huge accomplishment. How does it make you feel, to, have CP, but then also to have made these accomplishments of winning medals, being listed in the U.S. Navy? Were these things that maybe you thought, earlier on in life, like you were never going to be able to do? What was that process like?
Well, looking back on it, I'm proud of my service, but, I had some great sailors working for me. And that's what I think about when I look at my shadow box and I see all these awards or these decorations behind me on the wall. I had so much help. And as a Navy chief, to be able to train a generation of sailors to do great things and see them succeed, that's what I'm talking about. But personally, with cerebral palsy, I had no intention of ever sharing my story at all. None. In fact, I had moved from San Diego back home to the Detroit area. And my best friend, Phil, at the time was a principal of a middle school. And Phil and I would always tell our story of friendship together, about being friends, But Phil called me up one day. He said, I got this kid coming into the 6th grade. He's got cerebral palsy. And I told his parents about you, and they want to meet you. Do you want to meet them? I'm like, sure, So I go to meet this young boy named Trevor, and I met his parents, and I think his grandparents and his aunt and his uncle were there too. They had never met an adult with cerebral palsy before. So it was a really powerful moment for me and for the family, because they could see hope for their son just by talking to me. And I walked away from that thinking, wow, imagine what I could do if I could just get my story down on paper and get it out there to the world. And then I started looking for books written by an adult with a disability saying, hey, yeah, I've got this, but here's what I was able to accomplish. Mm-hmm. There's not that many books out there. There's really not. And that's really lit a fire on me, because I was like, you're kidding me, And now looking back on it, the fact that I was able to do everything that I did with cerebral palsy, the odds of that are, they're pretty astronomical, really.
Yeah.
So I really believe that I was put on this earth to deal with all that, so that I could sit here and talk with you today and spread the word of, yeah, I've got cerebral palsy, but here's what I was able to do. And you can do the same thing too. Whatever your accomplishments are, whatever your goals are in your life, you can achieve whatever you want. And don't allow people to put the low expectations on you. If you keep your expectations low, you're going to hit them all the time. So my message is always to raise those levels up, and let people, show you their own personal greatness, because everybody's got that greatness inside them. They just need the opportunity to show what they can do. And, I proved it in the Navy. I showed it in the Navy, but everybody's got, a story like that in them. I know that they do. And that's really what I'm really most proud about is, my life after the Navy and what I'm accomplishing now, because I really think people need role models, like we were talking earlier, in their lives to show them, hey, yeah, I've got cerebral palsy, and you know what? You should see me run. I run differently. I'm all over the place when I'm running, but I'm a marathoner. I ran the San Diego Marathon in 2000. So I don't care, what you look like. I don't care who you are. I just care about you and what you can accomplish. Together, we can accomplish some great things.
It's true. Those are great words of wisdom. So I think I know what your answer is, but for everyone else who's watching, when and how and if have you come to a place of acceptance with your CP or cerebral palsy?
That's a really good question. I think just in the process of writing my book, and just thinking about my life.
Joe again.
Through that process, and the fact that, my cerebral palsy wasn't really a big issue in my household growing up. It wasn't a big issue for me in the military, but as I sat down and started thinking about it totally, I got to the point where, yeah, you have cerebral palsy. And your life is different. You do have challenges. And, I think that's one of the things that kind of frustrates me a little bit, about the cerebral palsy community, is the fact that my cerebral palsy is mild, right? Mm-hmm. But I still have cerebral palsy, everybody has got their own challenges that they're dealing with, but together we are the cerebral palsy community. And sometimes I think we lose focus on that. And I hope that people, when they hear my story, will try and come together and go, hey, you know what? He's right. Whether you have mild cerebral palsy, whether your cerebral palsy is more challenging, that's fine. But we're all human beings trying to get through this together. Maybe I can say something that will help you. Maybe there's something that you can say that can help me. But together, we can do great things. And I'd love to see us come together more than I think we are right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So in your TED Talk specifically, and you spoke a little bit about this earlier, you speak about inclusion a lot. Do you think, based on from your time when you were in the Navy, where you didn't feel like there was much inclusion, to now, do you think there's a better place of inclusion? And kind of your job, quote unquote, and message to really create inclusion has been accomplished today?
I think we're getting there. I think we're making strides, but I think there's a big difference between talk and action. I'm a person of action. You can tell me that you're going to be inclusive, and that's great if you're a company. But okay, if you're inclusive, let me ask you one question. How many people with disabilities are within your workforce?
Not very many.
Not very many. Why do you think that is? Well, it's simply because it's easier to hire somebody who doesn't have a disability. It's just easier, right? But what are you gaining when you're hiring somebody who's got a disability? Well, you're hiring a different viewpoint. Maybe somebody's got a different perspective on how he or she sees the world. You're going to hire somebody who's going to be, I think, very loyal and very hardworking for you. And I think that's important. But you can also look at it from a business standpoint of the buying power of people with disabilities in this country is pretty strong. And I don't think corporations are really tapping into that right now. Simply because if you walk into a big business, can you get through? Can somebody who's in a wheelchair get through the front door? Can somebody who is in a power chair, can they use the restroom facilities? Can they get from the parking spot into the building? A lot of these companies, you can't, So when they talk about inclusion, we can do better. We can do better. We should do better. And I ask these businesses, hey, take a look. Take a look at your parking lot. Take a look at your front entrance. Take a look at your restroom facilities and look at your workforce and see, just hire one person with a disability. And I can guarantee you from that one person, you're going to want to hire several people with disabilities within your workforce because they're great workers. So I think we got a long way to go. But I do think that it's getting there. I'd like to see more action in that arena.
Within due time, there will be more. You'll see more. It's a process, but clearly, as you said, we've come a long way.
I think also within the United States, I think that we can do better from a national viewpoint, a national standpoint. Let's just talk about cerebral palsy and cerebral palsy awareness within the United States.
Mm-hmm.
We're not there. Who speaks for cerebral palsy issues within the U.S.? I know the United Cerebral Palsy is there, and I know they've got some great chapters around the country. But when's the last time you saw a cerebral palsy public awareness message on the television?
Not too often.
So, I'm out there trying to educate people about cerebral palsy. We're out there trying to educate people about cerebral palsy. It would be nice to have some national companies raise cerebral palsy awareness up to the level of autism awareness or even breast cancer awareness. I think it merits that type of focus. And I think it's long overdue.
Yeah, I would agree. So lastly, from what you know now in your life at X age, what would you have maybe told yourself 20 years earlier? What have you told yourself? Like, what have you learned about yourself?
To relax and accept some things about yourself. I think there was a time in my life when I was really hard on myself and I was very driven to succeed, and in my military career, I was very focused on obtaining, rank and doing really well. Well, you gotta relax. You gotta enjoy the journey too, because we only have so much time on this earth. So relax, take things one day at a time. Ask for help if you need it. It's okay to ask for help. I'm a big advocate of that now. And let people help you. Those are just some things that I've learned in the past 20 years or so. But it's a great life. I'm very fortunate, and it's a real pleasure to talk to you today. That's for sure.